For years, there's been this quiet crisis brewing in the world of artificial intelligence. It's a story about hunger, about power, and about a wall that our technology, on its own, just couldn't break through. But it's also a story about a solution, one that's helping AI learn to trust again. So let's dive into how we got here, and more importantly, where we're going next.
So, this is really the central question, isn't it? We see AI getting smarter and smarter every single day, but all of that growth, it hinges on one single resource: data. And that resource, well, it's been starting to dry up, leading to this massive bottleneck. Let's really unpack what that means.
And that brings us to our first big idea, what we're calling AI's great data famine. You can really think of this as a kind of information starvation. AI is absolutely hungry for knowledge, but its main food source, that high-quality data, is becoming dangerously hard to find. Think about how the early internet was built. There was this simple, kind of unspoken rule. Data belonged to whoever grabbed it first, and based on that one idea, tech giants built entire empires. They gathered these oceans of information, every click, every search, every little interaction, and locked it all away from the rest of us. Now, what's so wild about this is the sheer scale of the gap. I mean, look at this. On one side, you have just a few huge companies sitting on these almost infinite pools of data. And on the other side, well, you've got everyone else. Startups, researchers, open communities, all trying to build the future with just these little patchy scraps they can find on the public internet.
And this has very real consequences. Because when all the AI models are being trained on the same limited, privately owned data, they all start to think alike. They get trapped inside the same box, reflecting the same biases. The entire ecosystem just starts to suffocate.
And this quote just absolutely nails it. The roadblock for AI wasn't a failure of our algorithms or a lack of computing power. Nope. It was a failure of collaboration. We didn't run out of intelligence. We ran out of a shared, open source of truth for that intelligence to actually learn from. But at the very same time, a new idea was starting to take shape. Okay, so that was the problem. But that brings us to the solution, and it's rooted in the world of Web 3. At its heart, Web 3 is all about this shift to a decentralized, user-owned internet, and it came with a totally different philosophy on what data could be. This core idea from Web 3 was a complete game changer. It basically said, hey, what if the value of information doesn't come from owning it, but from sharing it? It suggested we could build systems where data is open, where it's verifiable, and where people are actually rewarded for their contributions, all without some central company calling the shots. And of course, this idea of collaborating with data, it's not some brand new concept, right? We see it all the time. Scientists from all over the world share data to fight a pandemic. Journalists team up to crack huge investigative stories. Volunteers work together to map disaster zones in real time. That instinct to share for a bigger purpose is already there. The real challenge was building a system that could do it on a global scale. And this is where it gets really interesting. It was like a perfect storm brewing. On one side, you had AI, and it was starving for structured, high-quality data. On the other side, you had Web 3, with tons of open, transparent data on blockchains, but it was all messy and unstructured, basically impossible to make sense of. Each one had exactly what the other was missing. So what happens when these two worlds collide? Well, you get this huge, pivotal shift. This is the moment where that simple idea, collaboration, stops just being a philosophy and starts becoming something way more solid, the actual infrastructure for the next generation of the internet. The solution, at least in principle, was beautifully simple. What if we just stopped? What if we stopped fighting over who owns little pieces of information and instead started working together to improve the quality and the context of the information we can all access? So here's how that actually works in the real world, using projects like Codatta as an example. You start with this raw, chaotic mess of data from the blockchain. Then thousands of people, contributors, jump in and start adding context. They might label a wallet address as an exchange or flag a transaction as a scam. The system then lets other users cross-check those contributions, which keeps it accurate. And the result? That messy pile of data gets transformed into a living, verifiable data set that anyone can build on. This right here represents a massive philosophical shift in how we think about data. I mean, for decades, we've treated data like it's property, something you own, you trade, you protect. This new view treats data more like a language. You don't own a word, right? But you contribute to its meaning and its context every single time you use it. And once you start seeing data that way, this whole new economic model just springs to life. In this system, you get rewarded not for locking data away, but for making it more useful. The more an AI model or an app uses the data you helped verify, the more value you've created. That recognition is baked right into the system.
So, what all of this really means is that collaboration stops being this optional, feel-good concept. It becomes the essential, invisible plumbing. It's the framework that makes sure our AI models stay reliable and our Web3 systems stay transparent. It's what keeps the whole thing running.
So when collaboration becomes the infrastructure, it builds something entirely new, a shared foundation we can call the new data commons. And this is a space for data that grows and gets better through participation, not through possession. And just look at this. This is a snapshot of the huge cultural change that's happening right now. We're moving from this idea of my data to our data set. We're shifting away from a model of just extracting value to one of participation. And we're evolving from this obsession with ownership to a mindset of stewardship, of taking care of a shared resource together. Of course, an open system like this can't just be a free-for-all. It has to have some rules. It really rests on three key pillars. First, the data has to be verifiable so we can trust where it came from. Second, it needs traceability, so every little change leaves a transparent trail. And finally, you need shared incentives so that everyone is rewarded for making the collective resource better, not for hoarding their little piece of it. So, in this new world, the way we measure success is getting completely flipped on its head. The projects that are going to thrive aren't the ones with the biggest, most guarded datasets. No way. They'll be the ones that open up their data, connect their systems, and basically create a foundation that lets other people build cool new things. And look, if there's one single lesson to take away from this whole entire shift, it's this. We've been taught for so long that innovation and progress have to be owned, they have to be proprietary and protected. But it turns out that's just not true. Progress doesn't need to be proprietary, it just needs to be verifiable. So we're left with this one last, really powerful question. For so long, the whole conversation has been about who owns and who controls the information. But as we move into this new era of collaboration, the much more exciting question becomes this. What incredible things can we build together once control is no longer the main goal?